You know that feeling when everything seems to be going perfectly, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, she goes quiet. The texts slow down. She seems a little distant. You replay every conversation in your head, trying to figure out what you did wrong. You check your last message 3 times, wondering if something you said landed badly. And the worst part is, you cannot even ask her directly, because that would probably make things worse. So you just sit there, quietly confused, watching someone you genuinely like slowly turn into a person who seems less interested by the hour. And here's the part that nobody talks about enough. What if you did nothing wrong? What if the very reason she pulled away is because she actually started liking you? I know that sounds almost deliberately unfair. Like the universe looked at your situation and said, let me add one more plot twist just for fun. But stay with me, because once you understand what is actually happening inside her mind during this phase, everything starts to make a different kind of sense. If you want to keep understanding these patterns and stop feeling confused by the behaviors that used to drive you crazy, subscribe to this channel. There are no magic tricks here, just real psychological insight that helps you see people more clearly. Hit that subscribe button and let us keep going deeper together. So let us start at the beginning. You met her. There was chemistry. Things were easy and natural. She was responsive, warm, maybe even a little playful. You felt that pull, that sense of genuine connection that does not happen all the time. And then something shifted. Maybe gradually, maybe almost overnight. She became harder to read. The warmth was still there sometimes, but mixed with this new coolness that felt confusing and a little painful. Most men in this situation assume they did something wrong. They start overthinking, over-explaining, or worse, they start chasing harder to compensate for the distance they feel. And that usually makes things worse. Not because chasing is always bad, but because they are solving the wrong problem entirely. Here is what is actually happening. When a woman starts to develop real feelings for someone, her emotional system does not respond with pure excitement the way movies suggest. Real attraction, the kind that actually means something, triggers a layer of vulnerability that most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid. Think about it from her perspective. She has probably been hurt before. She has probably liked someone who did not feel the same way, or felt the same way for a while, and then disappeared. She has likely learned, through experience, that the moment she allows herself to genuinely want something emotionally, the risk of losing it becomes very real. So what does the mind do when something feels important and fragile at the same time? It protects itself. Not always consciously, not always logically, but consistently. The pulling away is not rejection. It is her emotional immune system activating. It is the internal signal that says this one actually matters, and that means this one could actually hurt. The distance she creates is not about you being less appealing. In many cases, it is about you becoming more significant. And significance, for someone with emotional self-awareness, is terrifying in the best possible way. Before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you liked suddenly became distant, right when things felt like they were progressing? Where you started second-guessing yourself, even though nothing had actually gone wrong? If that experience resonates with you, drop a comment below. You can write exactly this. I thought it was me, but now I am starting to think differently. Sharing that small moment of recognition does 2 things. It helps you process your own experience, and it reminds someone else scrolling through the comments that they are not alone in this. These situations can feel incredibly isolating, especially when you cannot explain them to anyone without sounding like you are overanalyzing. But you are not overanalyzing. You are trying to understand something real. Part 6. Now, why do so many men misread this signal so completely? The answer is that we are trained, culturally and emotionally, to interpret distance as disinterest. When someone moves away from us, we assume they want less. That is a reasonable assumption in many contexts. If a friend stops calling, they probably want less contact. If a colleague avoids eye contact, something is probably off. Distance usually does mean something. But in early romantic dynamics, the meaning is often inverted. The closer she gets to genuinely liking you, the more her defense mechanisms activate. And those mechanisms look, from the outside, almost identical to losing interest. This is where the confusion becomes almost poetic in how cruel it is. The man sees her pulling back and interprets it as a sign that he needs to do more, say more, show more. So he increases his effort. He texts more. He becomes more available. He starts performing slightly, trying to recreate the ease of those early interactions. And she, who is already in the middle of an internal emotional negotiation, suddenly feels pressure added to vulnerability. That combination almost always pushes her further away, not because she does not like him, but because the pressure confirms her fear that the emotional stakes are rising faster than she can manage. There is a psychological principle worth understanding here. People tend to value what requires some level of emotional navigation. When something feels too easy, the mind sometimes questions its worth. When something involves a degree of tension or uncertainty, the emotional investment deepens. This does not mean you should play games or manufacture distance artificially. That approach is both exhausting and transparent to anyone with emotional intelligence. What it does mean is that your calm in the face of her distance is one of the most attractive things you can demonstrate at this stage. Not cold indifference, not passive aggression dressed up as confidence, genuine, grounded ease. The kind of ease that says, I see you pulling back, and I am not panicking about it. That kind of composure communicates something very specific to her emotional system. It tells her that you are not fragile. It tells her that her feelings are not going to destabilize you. And paradoxically, the thing that triggered her fear, which is that you actually matter, becomes less threatening when she realizes you are not going to crumble under the weight of it. Safety is one of the most underestimated elements of attraction. Not the safety of predictability or boredom, but the safety of knowing someone can hold steady when things get emotionally complex. There is also something important to recognize about timing. The pulling away phase is rarely permanent when the connection is real. It is more like a pressure test that neither of you consciously designed, but both of you are participating in. She is watching to see how you handle uncertainty. You are watching to see if she comes back. And the way you carry yourself during that window says more about your emotional depth than almost anything else you could do or say. The men who tend to navigate this well share a few common traits. They stay present without being suffocating. They remain warm without becoming desperate. They give her room to process without disappearing entirely. And they trust themselves enough not to need constant reassurance from her behavior in order to feel steady. That last one is probably the hardest, because it requires a level of internal security that most people are still building. But even the awareness of it is a starting point. Here is a simple truth worth carrying with you. The moment someone starts mattering to you is also the moment the situation becomes emotionally complex. That is not a flaw in the design of connection. That is the design. Depth requires risk, and risk requires courage. And courage in relationships often looks like staying calm when every instinct tells you to react. So the next time she pulls back right when things were going well, before you spiral into self-doubt or start composing that message, you will probably regret, pause, and consider a different interpretation. Maybe the distance is not a door closing. Maybe it is a person standing at the edge of something they are not quite sure they are ready for, looking to see if you are worth the leap. The answer you give her is not in your words. It is in how you carry yourself when the answer is not yet clear. Keep watching how people behave when things get real. That is where the most honest version of them shows up. And understanding that is what separates someone who gets continuously confused by people from someone who reads them with calm and clarity. That kind of understanding changes everything.